It's Friday, September 27th, 2019, and I'm here at the U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Eustis near Newport News, Virginia. Nicely done displays here, really. Somebody took some time and effort here. This is a display on river boats used for transportation of military items. Basket case. Soldiers recovered from the battlefield, usually without their arms or legs, who would be carried in a basket. Blotto, meaning drunk. Anglicized word for a French company that made unstable bicycles. Brass hats, high-ranking officers with brass or gold braid on their hats. Chum, originally a thief's accomplice, it became a term of friendship. Cootie, lace, probably referred to as the Eurasian coot, a bird always preening itself because it was covered with lice. A whole bunch of things here. Berlin. Very interesting. Uniforms. It must be the walking beam suspension.
Submarines and ships. By the end of World War II, 253 Liberty ships had been lost in all theaters of combat. But production capability in the United States eventually broke the back in attempts to stem the tide of American material.
Breakthrough as rapid as that was both unexpected. This success would soon cause unforeseen logistical problems. For as the Army moved rapidly from France towards Germany, it was moving further away from the North Sea beaches. Supplies they needed to continue their advance. The French railroad could not be used for bringing the needed gasoline, ammunition, food, and other commodities forward. They had been badly damaged by the Allies' own accumulation of margins. The responsibility for carrying this cargo would thus have to be undertaken by motor transportation. To accomplish this, adequate controls would have to be maintained over the large number of vehicles that would be required to make the round-trip runs, which were now lasting from 3 to 5 days. The answer was the establishment of 2 one-way circular routes that stretched from the beaches to the front. One would supply the First Army in the north, and the other would extend to the Third Army in the south. Thus, the Red Ball Express was begun on the 25th of August, 1944. The routes were well marked, and were only to be used by authorized traffic hauling priority cargo. Military police patrolled the lines 24 hours a day, and traffic control points were established in designated intersections so that convoys could be monitored and traffic kept moving freely. A speed limit of 25 miles per hour was established, and drivers were allowed to use full headlights at night with less of the signal, but they had to use blackout lights when approaching the forward areas. Eventually, the round trip to the First Army would stretch to 750 miles, and the Third Army would reach 670 miles. All of this activity would soon wear down both men and machines. Carriers were established at which maintenance could be performed on the trucks. Batteries were checked, tanks filled with gasoline, and repairs made. The drivers were also given food on trucks, which would only serve relaxation.
It's the rudder back there, and there's a point for the drive shaft for the propeller, but I don't see the propeller mounted on there.
Ed's right down there, I'll get you with him. I had to take the flash off because it was, there was too much light up there behind it.
We might want to ride on that.
It weighed 125 pounds.
Landing was the worst.
Yeah, it said it weighed 125 pounds. There it goes, see? Look at it. If you even got it just right, you can cruise.
The U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Eustis, Virginia, may be the only institution of its kind in the world. In it, you can see examples of all the major forms of military transport: trains, planes, helicopters, jeeps, flying saucers. That's right, flying saucers. This is the Car Mark II, invented in 1952 by a Canadian aerospace firm. Picked up in 1955 by the U.S. Air Force, it was originally intended to serve as a weapons platform. All there is a big wing with turbojet mounted underneath it, and the idea was to let those jets give it enough lift to let the aerodynamic forces take over and let it fly. Unfortunately, the engines were never strong enough to let it get much more than about 4 feet off the ground. Les Jensen is the curator of the Army Transport Museum. In his care are the strange, unusual, and sometimes bizarre experimental vehicles developed and tested for military use by the U.S. government. Like this ground effects machine X2. It looks like a 57 Buick convertible, but it's actually a sophisticated hovercraft. Without wheels or propellers, it was able to travel on land and water. The principle behind the X2 is called ground effects. That's when a cushion of air is pushed on the ground to cause a vehicle to hover. The Department of Aerospace Engineering at Princeton University did many experiments in ground effects machinery during the 50s and 60s, including this little saucer here. That is related to a lot of the same idea of developing air cushion situations where you use that cushion of air to let the vehicle ride on. That particular one was only experimental and didn't carry any cargo or anything like that. But another step in really pure small motor.
disintegrating. This whole crazy world is just too frustrating.
Not since D-Day during World War II has the United States moved its military so swiftly or decisively. Logistically, moving troops, weapons, and supplies is more difficult because of the lack of a mature transportation system. The distances were greater, the amount of cargo was dense, and sufficient service and needs. The provisional for the 702nd Transportation
Roll bar? Uh-huh.
What kind of training, son?
Army training, sir!
That is where the explosion generator was underneath him, so it came up through the door, and the cockpit door opened, and it blew off the plate that goes to the fuel inlet, blew that open. It was no way to the door to stay closed, so it just blew right open, didn't have a seatbelt on, but he got ejected. All in all,
So now we're on the outdoor exhibits. It's a landing craft vehicle personnel from the 1940s. It's made out of wood. An 060T tank side switcher. Narrow gauge locomotives for foreign service in Japan, Australia, Sudan, West and South Africa, and New Zealand. This locomotive was built in 1946, one of the last produced under Army contract. It was used for stationary hands-on training at the Transportation School until 1959. And still rests on its original shipping cradle. Railroad maintenance cars, engine operated and hand crank operation. It's nice to see all of the vehicles here with tires are jacked up. This one's a steam locomotive 280, number 607, and it's tender from the early 1940s. Four-wheel 20-ton European service boxcar. $40-ton railway flat car. This is a much bigger museum than I thought it was going to be. This one here is a diesel electric locomotive, MRS-1, from the early 1950s. And the one on the left we were looking at a bit earlier, diesel electric locomotive RSD1 from the late 40s, or I'm sorry, early 40s. Berlin duty train, passenger coach, operated by the Transportation Corps personnel for 45 years from December 1945 till December 1990. Train made scheduled trips in and out of West Berlin through East German checkpoints, transporting thousands of American military members, dependents, and others on official duty. First or second lieutenants usually commanded the trains and had a crew of 2 MPs, a conductor, a radio operator, and an interpreter. Typical passenger train pulled 3 sleeper coaches along with a baggage car, mail car, and a caboose for guard and escort. East German and Soviet authorities were not allowed to board any part of the train, so the U.S. commander and interpreter had to exit the train at each checkpoint so orders and papers could be inspected. This particular coach is a later model used in the 1980s. That's even after I was there. It was a sleeper coach, which meant that the bench seating could be converted into beds. The trains left at night and arrived the next morning. This night travel was in both directions between West Berlin and West Germany. Cameras and alcohol were prohibited on board the trains, and the curtains had to be closed at all times. This coach, as well as the guard car, were donated to the museum in 1991 by the German government. There's a caboose. This is the guard car. This German caboose is from the Berlin duty train. It was operated from 1960 to 1989. Numerous scheduled runs in and out of West Berlin during the Cold War. Usually manned by a conductor, radio operator, military policeman, interpreter, and the train commander, usually a first or second lieutenant. Donated to the museum by the German government after the city was reunified in 1991. They've got the wrong sign here. It's not a caboose. I think that one back there is the caboose. Must have moved things around a little bit. It's the other side of the same diesel electric loco we saw earlier. Is this some sort of a plow? Let's see. Yeah, snowplow spreader ditcher car. Snowplow spreader ditcher car. O.F. Jordan Company of East Chicago delivered this car in 1953 for testing in Fort Eustis, Virginia. Most commonly referred to as the Jordan Spreader, it was designed to be a heavy-duty snowplow, a ballast spreader, and a ditching machine all in one. Surprisingly simple piece of equipment with virtually no complicated parts, required very little maintenance, designed for year-round use. With no organic power source, required a 1600 horsepower diesel-electric locomotive or a 280 class steam locomotive like the 607 in this museum in order to provide sufficient air supply and traction for successful operations. Since it tended to derail, the spreader was frequently used in tandem with a 75-ton wrecking crane. Maybe this is the crane. Wrecking steam locomotive railway crane. Built by the Brown Hoist Company in 1952, the 75-ton crane was designed for both foreign and domestic service, weighing almost 170,000 pounds. Its self-propelled double hoist and secondary single hook cable provided lift capacity for loading heavy material and equipment. The advantage of two hoists was that the main one had a lift capacity for large loads, while the auxiliary one, although significantly less powerful, had a greater reach. The entire boom, which provides all the lifting capability of the crane, measures at approximately 25 feet with an extension of about 12 feet beyond the body of the crane, used mainly to lift derailed train cars and to remove debris from the tracks. This is dating from the 1950s. Petroleum railway tank car from 1949. This is an M26A1 truck tractor, 12-ton 6x6. Early in World War II, the Chinook truck company developed the winning design, and then Pacific Car and Foundry Company took over production of all the tractors starting in 1943. An M15A1 semi-trailer tank transporter, 45-ton, used in World War II. And an M4A3 tank, medium, 75mm Sherman from World War II. An M911 tractor, 25-ton 8x6 Seahet, based on the Oshkosh J2065 commercial tractor, the M911 commercial heavy equipment transporter, or Seahet, used throughout the 1980s. Desert Storm, Desert Shield. An M747 semi-trailer, heavy equipment, 60-ton. And an M60A3 main battle tank, 105mm, the Patton. M1070 truck, tractor 8x8, Het. This was used in Operation Iraqi Freedom. This one is not adequately jacked, obviously. Got some collapsed tires on it. And this is an M1000 semi-trailer, 70-ton. Lots of wheels, lots of independent suspensions, lots of axles, and a Cayman mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle. This was used in Iraq. And there's another Huey. An M872A1 trailer flatbed 34-ton. From the 1970s, and I'm looking into the sun, so it's not optimal. This is an M915A4 truck tractor, 14-ton 6x4, up armored, from the 1990s, based on a Freightliner design. Looks like we have a hovercraft over here. Modern military housing. Some of these buildings here look a lot like some of the ones I grew up in. If anybody's watched my video on my impromptu nostalgia tour in St. Clair County, Illinois, the kind of houses we lived in the first time I was there in the Wary housing area, they weren't exactly like this, but they have a lot of the same vibe. Although these have some brickwork on them, and the ones we had at Wary, as I recall, had either little or no brick. They were mostly just plain old wood construction. They might have had some brick facing. This is a really nice museum. I hadn't even planned to go here. I was aware of its presence, but I figured it was going to be some dinky little museum. And I just decided I had enough driving and I would stop, and really glad I did. Air cushion vehicle Sk5, developed by Bell Aero Systems in the late 1950s. I don't believe they had one of these at the Hovercraft Museum in England. I have a video on that if you haven't seen it already. An XM437E1 cargo truck, 16-ton 4x4 goer. This is from 1956 or 1957 thereabouts. This one was made in the 60s. And they continue to use trucks of this basic class, according to the sign, until the 1980s. So there's another large outdoor yard. on the other side of the museum building, but it doesn't look like I can just walk around to it. I have to go back through the building. Gonna have to do this zigzag business to get through the building. Wish they had a map. Never sure which way to go to get where I'm going in the shortest distance. I don't think that's it. Okay, access to the remaining outdoor displays is just by going outside the museum on the front side. It's all back in here. There's another shed, although it's smaller than the railroad one. Okay, this is a M123A1C truck, tractor, 10-ton 6x6 from the 1960s, used through the 1990s. This is a M923 truck. It's a cargo truck, 5-ton 6x6. This one's modified. Looks like it has some extra bolt-on steel plating, a little extra armoring. This vehicle was found in Kuwait after serving as a gun truck doing convoy security work. Had makeshift armor. And this is a M816 wrecker truck, 5-ton 6x6 from the 1950s. This is an M41 truck, cargo truck, 5-ton 6x6. From the 1940s, used in the Korean War. This one is not marked. This is an XM1078 cargo truck, 2.5-ton 4x4 from the 1980s. So who built this one for them? I'm trying to find out. This was supposed to be the replacement for the original Deuce and a Half vehicles. Stewart and Stevenson won the competition using a vehicle based on a modified Steyr 12 M18 truck. I don't see where it mentions. I guess the manufacturer is Stewart and Stevenson. Okay. This one is also not marked, although there's a sign in between the two trucks. I think it's this, well, a little hard to tell. I guess they're basically the same truck. Small differences. It's an M35A2 truck. It's for cargo, 2.5 ton 6x6. This was from the 1960s. An M211 or M211 truck. It's a cargo truck, 2.5 ton 6x6. It was put forward by GMC as a vehicle to replace the worn out World War II era Deuce and a Half trucks. And this is a ARTFT-6 forklift for rough terrain, 3 ton 4x4. Produced by, is it Athey Company? Athey? A-T-H-E-Y. Based on a civilian design from the 1950s. This is another one of these ducks. I think there was a similar one inside. An XM147 Super DUKW from 1942. I didn't do much narration inside the building out of courtesy for other people who were in there. I was mostly not getting them in the pictures, but I figured my narration would bug them, so I just showed the pictures. They were all being very quiet, so I didn't want to be the noisy one. GPW utility truck, 1/4 ton 4x4. It's a Jeep, basically. And this is a M38 utility truck, 1/4 ton 4x4, another variant of the Jeep. The M38A1 utility truck, 1/4 ton 4x4. This entered service in 1952. Like a Blackhawk going over there. An M151A1 utility truck, 1/4 ton, the Mutt, M-U-T-T, from the 1950s. Looks like this one was built by AM General. So it's Jeep-like, but it's not exactly a Jeep. M151A2 utility truck, 1/4 ton 4x4. It's another Mutt from, looks like it's from the 1970s or thereabouts, 1969. This was actually built by Ford. Here's an M1097 heavy variant 4x4, the HMMWV, developed in 1991, built by AM General. And this is the XM1109 heavy variant, up-armored 4x4 from 1993. This is an M221 truck. It's a tractor truck, 2.5 ton, 6x6. From a family of trucks designed by GMC to replace the worn out World War II deuce and a halves that were still in service. Served into the 1970s. Got a couple of those big old high flotation tires back there. Yeah, that's what these are. It's the T3 Rolling Liquid Transporter, or RLT. Experimental vehicle designed to allow fuel to be towed into the field by both tracked and wheeled vehicles. The design of the T3 made it possible to be moved by a vehicle as small as an M38A1 Jeep inside a base, but for field operations, a deuce and a half truck or bigger would be required to tow it. 5 RLTs totaling 5,000 gallons could be towed by a single vehicle. A unique aspect of the transporter was that it was designed to float even while loaded with fuel, and when removed from its frame, the bladders could be air transported by helicopters. The Army experimented with different styles and types, the T3 being the most common. They had excellent low ground pressure, as a result that it did very well in snow or marsh. They were used extensively in Greenland, supporting the Dew Line resupply operations and Project Lead Dog, a ground convoy that mapped the northern reaches of Greenland. While the towed version did not see long use in the Army, the bladders themselves saw extensive use as air-portable fuel cells. And there's a image of them in use. So they're sort of tires, but they're really rolling fuel bladders. Interesting, I had not seen these before. DCO 205H tractor 5-ton 4x2 from 1965, International Harvester. And a 2000D Fleet Star tractor truck 5-ton 4x2. Looks pretty stock. This was looks like it was used to augment the commercial fleet used in Europe. This vehicle was built in 1972 and used by the 37th Transportation Group until 1985, when it was shipped back from Germany to the museum. And the trailer itself is an M129A1C semi-trailer 12-ton. This is an M52A2 tractor truck, 5-ton 6x6 from the mid-1940s. The basic design anyway, it looks like. Just a quick scan of the sign. It says that these were still being purchased in 1965, used in the 1970s. This particular one was the last, was last fielded in Operation Desert Shield Desert Storm. Okay. And it has an M127A1 stake and platform semi-tractor trailer. This is an M818 truck, tractor type 5-ton 6x6, introduced in 1970, and it's pulling an M172A1 lowboy semi-trailer. And this is a model 94x43 tractor truck, 4 to 5 ton 4x4 with a model 1025 semi-trailer stake and platform type 10 ton. Okay, that does it for this particular shed. Okay, this is another compound here. Maritime Operations. Collection of propellers and anchors. FS anchors, freight supply ships. Kind of like that. Early days of World War II. And this is a Tetrapod breakwater armor unit, otherwise known as the Breakwater Jack. Invented in 1950, first used in France, and is one of several different styles of armor units in use today. The idea was to create a product that would help prevent beach erosion caused by wave action. Practice at the time was to use rubble mount type of breakwaters because of its good hydraulic properties. 19 different designs were created between 1950 and 2002. While varying in size, shape, and design, they all lend themselves to construction of very rough facings, are very porous, and are unaffected by upward pressures, and are capable of standing up to waves of considerable height. They can be armor unit construction can be solid, hollow, concrete, metal, or a combination. Can be placed in single rows, double rows, or piled at random. Current, wave action, type of base, and speed of erosion help blah 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 blah. This Tetrapod was one of two brought back to Fort Eustis by the 24th Transportation Battalion after operations in Somalia ended in 1994. The other one that was brought back is in front of Fort Lee, Virginia. So this is the kind of place they were used. Tetrapods along a pier at entrance to Mogadishu Harbor, Somalia. Interesting. This is a marine diesel engine DMG-6 used as a training aid. It was built with the plexiglass panels in it for that purpose. Vertical axis propeller, beach discharge lighter BDL-1X. And this is, we saw that model inside earlier. That looked like this. And it was used on, that was the BDL Lieutenant Colonel John U.D. Page, commissioned in 1958. Ship was designed to be an ocean-going vessel capable of rapid discharge of cargo directly onto a beach. The design of the ship also allowed it to be used to ferry items from a ship anchored offshore to the beach. One of the unique features of the Page was its cycloidal axis propellers. These unique propellers made it possible to throw the full thrust from the engines in any direction without the need of rudders. They permitted the ship to move forward, reverse, or from side to side with equal ease. Individual blades of the propellers could also be removed when damaged without replacing or placing the ship in dry dock. This is a Model 243B picket boat, or J-boat. Traces its lineage back to pre-World War II command and control vessels. The all-steel hulled 243B had a 3-man crew for standard duty. It was built in 1954. And this behemoth here. Look at those wheels. That's taller than I can reach standing with my arms stretched above my head. It's a barge, amphibious resupply cargo, or Bark 3X, used during the Korean War. It was pulled from active use in 1963. Fort Eustis saved this prototype as an example. And this guy right behind me is a small bow tugboat used in the interwar period of the 1920s to the 1930s. This was built, they saw the need in the 1920s and 1930s. This one here was built in 1952. But the pre-war styling from the 1930s is apparent, but this one's been extensively updated to provide for better crew comfort levels and increased handling. And here's another pavilion out here. Looks like it's all airplanes. Just a whole lot of stuff just out here in the breeze. A couple of jet engines providing all the power. This is a CH-54 Tarhe made by Sikorsky as the S-64 Sky Crane. Took its first flight in 1962. And then the CH-54B, A and B models, of which this is one, officially known as the Tarhe, commonly called the Sky Crane, used two Pratt & Whitney turbine engines capable of lifting 10 tons. It has standard cockpit forward and another cockpit facing aft, which a rear-facing pilot used when lifting large loads. That's pretty cool. I thought that was just like a loadmaster position, but it's actually a pilot position, so that it can be flown while the guy's sitting in here looking backwards and lifting things using the crane. It is definitely one thing I did not know about this model. This particular aircraft is the third production Tarhe and the only early variant to survive Vietnam, with over 1,000 combat hours with the 478th Transportation Company 1st Cavalry Division. This aircraft has the most combat hours of any CH-54. It came to Fort Eustis from Vietnam, where it was used as a trainer before being retired to the museum in 1979. Looks like maybe it was used with the Golden Knights parachute team. this is based on a de Havilland Caribou. Let's see if I got that right. Well, it is a de Havilland Caribou. It's a YAC-1/CV2/CV7 Caribou. The Army acquired the Yak-1 and CV2 Caribou in 1958. Initially procuring 173, the de Havilland Caribou was the largest fixed-wing aircraft in the Army inventory. Originally designated the Yak-1, was redesignated CV2 in 1962 and retained that designation. The Army took the CV2 to Vietnam in 1962, where their short-field performance and 3-ton payload made it an excellent tactical transport airplane. The Army released the CV2s to the Air Force in 1966 under an Army Air Force agreement. The Army traded the Caribou for an end to all restrictions on helicopters. It's for this reason that many consider the Caribou to be the most significant aircraft in Army aviation history. The United States Air Force designated the Caribou as the C-7 and soon ended the short field missions the Caribou was well known for, relegating it to general cargo transport. The Army kept several prototypes, including this example. This particular one was the 5th prototype. This aircraft was a replacement for the first prototype, which crashed. The Army's Golden Ice parachute team used this aircraft from October 73 to December 1985, when it was retired, ending a 30-year flying career as the last Caribou in Army service. Pretty cool. I always liked the Caribou. However, the first time I ever saw one of these, it was crashing in a video. It's probably still up on YouTube somewhere. The crew took off without releasing their control surface locks, and the plane just kept angling up higher and higher until it stalled and tipped over and crashed nose first into the ground. It was a gut-wrenching video to watch, but I think it's a pretty cool airplane. Okay, I think there's a back door to this pavilion. It's full of bird netting, probably because the birds just love nesting in these things. But the bird netting is all torn up, so I guess the birds are probably getting in. Yeah, this is all open. Okay, what do we have here? This is the CH-37 Mojave. Sikorsky produced. Prototype first flew in 1953. At the time it was made, it was the largest helicopter in the Western world. Two 2100 horsepower piston engines were mounted in outboard pods that also contained the retractable landing gear. There's one of them. It could accommodate 2 Jeeps or a 105 millimeter howitzer. It could also be used to carry 26 troops or 24 litters. They deployed to Vietnam, where their primary role was aircraft recovery. It was replaced in the 1960s with the new CH-54 Tarhe and subsequently the CH-47 Chinook, both employing the newer turboshaft engines that rendered the larger and heavier piston engines obsolete. The Mojave helicopter on display is a combination of parts from several helicopters. It was assembled in Arizona, then flown to Fort Eustis as it was too large to ship by truck. This is a VH-34C or H-34C Choctaw. Should that, oh, I'm sorry, Choctaw. I knew better. Just brain dead. Yeah. Sikorsky's H-34 Choctaw first flew in 1954. Army brought it into service in 1955 as a transport vehicle. That was 1955. It was one of the Army's 2 standard light helicopters for transportation of supplies, equipment, and personnel, as well as medical evacuation. It was considered so safe and reliable that in 1957 the Secret Service determined a helicopter would be safer, more efficient, than cost-effective way for the President to travel. So this was a presidential helicopter, or this type was used for that. This particular Choctaw started with the Army as an H-34A before converted into an H-34C. One of the first Choctaws to be changed, and was then assigned as an executive flight detachment, or to an executive flight detachment. This particular aircraft served President Kennedy before being replaced by the CH-3. It was moved to the Virginia Army National Guard before it retired and came to this museum. So this was a presidential transport helicopter. And this beautiful piece of work here a VH-60A Blackhawk VIP version entering service in 1979. The UH-60 has become the premier transport helicopter of the Army, built by Sikorsky. This is the VIP variant. This particular one started its life as a standard UH-60A, arriving in Fort Campbell, Kentucky in 1981. It served for 12 years in various units. After its return from combat, the aircraft spent a few more years at Fort Campbell before being selected for a modification and sent to the Bluegrass Army Depot, Kentucky, where it spent 2 years being modified and sent, or modified to the aircraft you see. The aircraft spent the next 12 or 19 years flying dignitaries, heads of state, and other important personnel around Washington, D.C. This is a YCH 47B or a YCH 1B or a YCH 47A Chinook. This is the third prototype of the venerable CH-47 line. It is now the oldest Chinook in existence, built in 1959. Following his test career, it served as a maintenance trainer in Fort Eustis until 1975 when it was retired. In the early 90s, this aircraft was in a field in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, owned by Southeast Equipment Corporation. After efforts to fully restore the aircraft fell short, it was turned over to this museum in 1992. It was damaged in shipment and then sat outside for 10 years before finally being moved to the museum. In 2013, it was transported to Delaware for restoration by Summit Aviation, and a year later it was returned to the museum. I still think this is one of the dumbest looking helicopters I've ever seen, but I guess they did a good job at what they were supposed to do. The CH-21C Shawnee, introduced into service in 1950 by Piasecki Helicopters. Army purchased 334 of them, and 16 more were used by the Air Force. Multi-purpose helicopter capable of carrying 20 troops or 2,300 pounds of cargo. was Army's workhorse during the early years of the Vietnam War. This particular aircraft is a veteran of one of the U.S. Army combat units serving in Vietnam. After having been used in Vietnam, it was arrived at Fort Eustis, where it saw service until 1967, when it was turned over to the Army Transportation Museum. This is a U-8D Seminole. It was basically a beach commercial twin engine aircraft. It was used as a utility transport aircraft by the Army, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard. This particular one was used as a maintenance trainer here at Fort Eustis. This is the OH-23 Raven. This one on display was used to train pilots at Fort Walters, Texas. Transferred to Fort Eustis in 1960 to help train helicopter mechanics. This is the TH-55 Osage, or Osage, built by Hughes Aircraft, originally known as the Model 269. Two-place side-by-side primary training helicopter. Over 860 eventually entered the Army inventory. This particular one was used to train student pilots at Fort Rucker, Alabama, before being returned and retired to this museum. It's going to be a little hard to get the lighting right on these. This is the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior from the late 1969, first taking flight in 1969. This particular one is the first Model A and the first one converted to a Model D. It's also the first aircraft to be resurrected through the wartime replacement program. Came to the museum in 2014. This is one of the famous cybernetic walkers. Cool. Quadruple walking machine built by General Electric. Could carry up to 500 pounds of cargo over extremely difficult terrain, inaccessible to any other vehicle traveling on the surface. General Electric was commissioned to design the vehicle in 1966, delivered in 1970. Could walk at a speed of up to 5 miles per hour, was powerful enough to haul a Jeep out of a mud hole. Could also climb over large obstacles, balance on its diagonal legs, and push 1,000 pounds across a concrete floor. The operator balanced and coordinated the legs through controls attached to his hands and feet. The coupling between the man and the machine was so good that the operator could rely on his own sense of balance to accurately and easily maneuver the vehicle. Because it was not very difficult to operate, this became the first successful walking machine capable of random motions. It took approximately 5 hours of practice for an operator to walk the rig forward and backwards, turn around, and balance on 2 diagonal legs. In theory, the walking machine should have been a great tool, but it never made it out of the testing phase. A large flaw was that it used 50 gallons of oil per minute, requiring it to be attached to hydraulic power lines at all times. It did not have a self-contained hydraulic motor, essentially. Army funding was soon cut, but other machines have been successfully made for the logging industry, and of course this is the DOAC, or DOAC, 16VC4DA, the first vertical takeoff and landing aircraft to demonstrate the tilt duct concept. Proposed in the 1950s, built by the DOAC, or DOAC Aircraft Company. It was a research aircraft. The VZ4 on display was the end product of the company's many years of research and development in the VTOL field. After 3 years of joint testing by Army and NASA, the sole VZ4 here was withdrawn from the Army inventory and used solely by NASA before being turned over to the museum in 1973. Here's another Huey, UH-1H Iroquois. This particular one is a veteran of 3 tours in Vietnam. It was sent to Vietnam in 1968. It came to the maintenance center in Fort Eustis and served until 2010 when it came to the museum. This looks like a parade float. The GEM, or GEM model 2500 Aircar. Curtiss-Wright Corporation developed the Aircar with the hope that a hovercraft would be accepted as an alternative to the traditional family car. The car was given features such as dual headlights, taillights, turn indicators, bumpers, and a convertible top. Never caught on, but the possibilities were not lost on the Army. In the 1960s, they purchased 2 Curtiss-Wright Model 2500 Aircars. It was a 360 horsepower 3-passenger vehicle which traveled at speeds from 20 to 38 miles per hour at heights of 10 to 12 inches in the air. This is one of the 2 units purchased and tested at Fort Eustis. This is a H-25A Mule, Piasecki. The Transportation Aviation Group at Fort Eustis trained students on H-25s like this one through the 1950s. This particular one spent its operational career in the U.S. Navy as an HUP-2 before being turned over to the U.S. Army Museum for display. This is an Air Jeep 2 VZ-8P-B from Piasecki Aircraft, using a pair of 3-bladed ducted rotors placed in a tandem configuration with twin 185 horsepower piston engines, fairly conventional helicopter type controls that provided good directional stability. Could accommodate 1 passenger in addition to the pilot. Although air jeeps were intended to operate within a few feet of the ground, both were capable of flying at altitudes of several thousand feet. These were found to be stable and relatively capable aircraft. Despite many positive qualities, the Air Jeep, like most flying jeeps developed during this period, was ultimately judged by the Army to be ill-suited to the rigors of field operations. This is a U6A Beaver, built by de Havilland, Canada, from 1948. This particular aircraft was assigned to the 20th Transportation Company, 520th Transportation Battalion, 34th Support Group, which served in Vietnam from 1967 through 1971. It eventually moved around and came to the museum in 1970. This is a U-1A Otter, also built by de Havilland, Canada. A larger version of the successful U-6A Beaver. The Army began purchasing these in 1955. They ceased production on this in 1968 after 468 aircraft had been built. Of these aircraft, 223 had been produced under the designation U-1A for the U.S. Army. The Otter displayed here was used by the Army Aviation Logistics School, Fort Eustis, for training purposes after returning from Vietnam. It was transferred to the museum in 1973. And it's pushing 2 o'clock, and I still have another museum to go to nearby. It's a maritime museum. And then I have about a 5.5 hour drive down to Charleston, where I'm going to go to the Patriots Point Naval Museum in the morning, and then hopefully visit the Huntley Civil War submarine in the afternoon before heading back up in this direction to Virginia for another 3 days of visiting and various museums and historical sites. There's a couple, 3 amphibious vehicles which I haven't yet looked at. This is a landing craft, Mechanized Model 6 or LCM-6. After the First World War and the British seaborne invasion failure at Gallipoli, the United States and United Kingdom began working on a class of vehicles designed to transport troops just launched from transports offshore. They were designed to beach themselves, discharge their soldiers and vehicles, and head back for another load from the mothership. And this style of boat became designated as the landing craft mechanized. The LCM-3, built by Higgins, is the most widely used in World War II. The LCM-6 took the Higgins design and extended the hull 6 feet in length amidships. This increased the carrying capacity without hampering performance, up the number of soldiers carried from 60 to 80, and allowed for 4 tons of additional cargo weight to be loaded. By Vietnam, the Mike boat, as it was now called, was starting to show its age, and a newer Mike boat, the LCM-8, was already in production. The LCM-6 didn't go without a fight, making its name as an early workhorse in Vietnam. By 1967, the last LCM-6 were pulled from the front lines after 3 decades, or not 3 decades, after service in 3 wars. This is the Lark Xv, lighter amphibious resupply cargo craft. This is an aluminum-hulled, four-wheeled craft designed to be loaded with palletized or crated cargo from supply ships off the shore from a desired delivery point. It was capable of hauling the recently introduced mill van metal cargo containers, speeding the delivery process. The collapsible canvas sidewalls of the Lark Xv were used to aid unloading procedures early on, but metal sidewalls were later installed for heavier loads. In addition, the hull was designed to allow the bow to be lowered and a ramp deployed, making unloading even easier. The rear-mounted driver's station required a crewman to stand when a mill van crate was loaded, resulting in a unique plexiglass bubble atop for the servicemen to get a clear line of sight. These served into the 1980s. Looks like there might have been something else here, but it isn't here now. Okay, one more to go. This is the later amphibious resupply cargo Lark Xv, or 5X, which I presume means four-wheel drive plus a propeller, maybe? After the Korean War, the famous DUKW design was beginning to show its age. Improved amphibious vehicles were sought. The Lark Xv had double the hauling capacity of the DUKW. Its use of light canvas sidewalls solved the issues that had slowed down loading and unloading with the high-walled DUKW. Four-wheel drive and an aluminum hull was gradually accepted into the Army by 1963. This particular one's the fifth of 7 prototypes built by Borg-Warner Corporation. It was loaned to the U.S. Navy for testing in 1960. In 61, along with another Lark Xv and a Lark, what would that be, 15, it was sent to Cape Canaveral to support NASA's Project Mercury program. Following its stint in Florida, the 5X took part in the U.S. combat readiness demonstration for President Kennedy and other dignitaries at Fort Bragg. With production approved, the 5X was transferred to the amphibian training branch. Under their care, the 5X became the last of the prototypes to be actively used by the U.S. Army before being transferred to the museum in 1968. So the 5X is a designation, not a description. Alright, that completes my visit to this museum. I expected it to be a small museum that I'd maybe spend half an hour at with maybe a few vehicles parked outside somewhere. I thought, you know, a couple of tanks and on trailers, a couple of Jeeps, a couple of deuce and a halves. Instead I have this first-rate museum here. Very pleasant surprise.